Hey there, and welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a really big topic, fiscal policy. What is it? Well, it's basically the government's economic playbook, and believe me, it has a direct impact on your wallet through things like spending and taxes. So let's break down how this whole thing works, shall we?
All right, let's just dive right in. So, here's the game plan for today. First up, we're going to ask the big question: what exactly is fiscal policy? From there, we'll look at what governments are actually trying to do with it. Then we'll get into the tools they have in their toolkit. We're also going to jump into that huge debate around national debt. And to wrap it all up, we'll explore why this whole thing is, well, way harder than it looks. Okay, first things first. Before we get into all the juicy debates, we need to get a super clear definition of what fiscal policy actually is. And, just as important, what it isn't. There's a lot of confusion out there, so let's clear it up. So, I want you to picture the economy as this enormous ship, right? It's out there on a pretty choppy sea. It can't just be left to drift, or who knows where it'll end up. No, it needs a captain, someone at the helm to navigate through the storms and guide it safely to its destination. So the really big question is, how does a government actually steer this massive ship? And the answer? Well, it's actually surprisingly simple. When you boil it all down, fiscal policy is really about two main things: how much money the government brings in through taxes, and where it decides to spend all that money. That's it. You can basically think of it as the nation's budget, where every single decision sends these huge ripples across the entire economy. Okay, now this is super important because it clears up something a lot of people get mixed up. You see, there are two different toolkits for managing the economy. On one hand, you've got fiscal policy, that's what we're talking about today, and it's controlled by the government. Their tools are taxes and spending. But then you have this other thing called monetary policy. That's handled by the central bank, and they use different tools, like changing interest rates. So two different players, two different toolkits.
But here's the key thing. Even though their tools are different and the people in charge are different, their ultimate goal is exactly the same. They're both trying to create a healthy, stable economy. An environment where businesses feel confident enough to invest, where we all feel secure in our jobs, and where the prices of things aren't just shooting through the roof.
So that brings us to the big why, right? Why do governments even bother with all this stuff? What are they really trying to achieve when they start tweaking taxes and changing their spending? Let's take a look at their main goals.
It really comes down to three big things. First, they want to manage what economists call aggregate demand. Look, it sounds fancy, but it just means the total amount of spending happening in the economy. So if everyone suddenly stops buying stuff, that's a problem, and the government might want to step in to get things moving again. Second, they try to influence how money and wealth are spread out among the population. And third, they want to guide resources to specific parts of the economy, maybe things like green technology or healthcare. So yeah, it's about the size of the whole economic pie, how the slices are cut, and what ingredients are used to make it. So how do they actually do all that? Let's get practical. Let's look inside the government's toolkit. When it comes right down to it, there are really just two main levers they can pull. Okay, lever number one is revenue, the money coming in. If we take a look at this chart for the UK, it gives us a really clear picture. You can see right away that the biggest chunks of money come from income tax, national insurance, and VAT. Basically, it's taxes on what we earn and what we buy. And then on the flip side, we've got lever number two, spending. Where does all that money go? Well, you can see here that the biggest slice by far is social protection. That's stuff like pensions and other benefits. After that, you've got health and education eating up huge portions. Looking at these two charts together really gives you a snapshot of what a government's priorities are. So how do they actually use these levers? Well, think about it like driving a car. If the economy feels kind of sluggish, like it's stalling, the government can hit the accelerator. That's expansionary policy. They might cut taxes, leaving more cash in our pockets to spend, or they might ramp up their own spending to create jobs. But if the economy is going too fast, really overheating and causing prices to rise, they can tap the brakes. That's contractionary policy. They'll raise taxes or cut back on spending to cool things down a bit. And this right here leads us directly into one of the most controversial and hotly debated topics in all of economics. What happens when a government keeps spending more money than it's taking in from taxes year after year? Well, that's when we enter the world of budget deficits and the national debt. First, let's get these two terms straight, because people mix them up all the time. A budget deficit is just the shortfall in a single year. It's a one-year thing. The national debt, on the other hand, is the grand total, the accumulation of all those past deficits all added together.
A good way to think about it is like this. The deficit is how much you overspent on your credit card this month. The debt is your total outstanding balance.
And wow, the amount of debt countries carry, it varies wildly across the globe. Just take a look at this chart. Japan's national debt was a staggering 236% of its GDP. Let that sink in. The country owed more than twice what its entire economy produced in a whole year. And you can see the US and the UK were also carrying some pretty heavy debt loads themselves. Now, this timeline of the UK's debt is fascinating because it gives us some really important historical context. Look at those huge spikes. What do you see? They line up almost perfectly with massive national emergencies. The Napoleonic Wars, World War I, World War II. What this tells us is that huge government borrowing, especially in a crisis, well, it's not a new phenomenon, not by a long shot.
So, the million-dollar question, should we be worried about all this debt? Is it a big problem? Well, the honest truth is, economists just don't agree. It's a huge debate. On one side of the argument, you have people saying, look, it's manageable. A lot of the time, a country just owes the money to its own citizens, and that borrowing can pay for crucial investments that help the economy grow later. But on the other side, you have economists warning that this is a major risk. They worry it'll lead to higher taxes down the road, that it could scare off investors, or that government borrowing will crowd out private companies from getting loans. So yeah, there are really strong arguments on both sides.
Okay, this all brings us to a really critical point. If governments have these powerful tools and they have these clear goals, why is managing the economy so ridiculously hard? I mean, why can't they just get it right every single time? Let's go back to that car analogy we used earlier. The government has the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes. So why isn't the ride perfectly smooth all the time? Well, the problem is that steering an entire economy isn't like driving on a nice empty racetrack. The real world is full of traffic, potholes, and a ton of unexpected delays. And here they are, the three big delays that make this so tricky. First, you've got the recognition lag. Think about it. Economic data isn't instant. It takes time to collect. So it's literally like trying to drive a car while only looking in the rear view mirror. You don't even realize there's a problem until it's already behind you. Then there's the action lag. This is the political part. You know, politicians have to debate, argue, and finally agree on what to do. That can take forever. And finally, there's the impact lag. Even after they do make a decision, it can take months, sometimes even longer, for that policy to actually start working its way through the economy and make a real difference. And as if those time lags weren't enough, policymakers are trying to juggle a whole bunch of other problems at the same time. I mean, trying to predict the future of the economy, it's notoriously difficult. People and businesses can change their behavior on a dime, which is totally unpredictable. You've got that risk of crowding out private investment, and of course, politics is always a factor, pushing for decisions that might be popular, but not necessarily the best for the economy long term. This quote here really just nails it. The economy isn't some simple machine that you can perfectly fine-tune with a few tweaks. Not at all. It's this incredibly complex, living, breathing system. And it's constantly getting hit by unexpected shocks. I mean, think about global pandemics or sudden oil price spikes. It's a wild ride. And so all of this leaves us with one final big question to think about. At the end of the day, fiscal policy is a constant balancing act. It's about making really tough choices, often with incomplete information, where there are always trade-offs. So let me ask you, when it all comes down to it, what do you think a government's #1 economic priority should be? Should they push for as much growth as possible right now, or should they focus on carefully managing debt for the sake of the future? There really is no easy answer. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.